Welcome to the rebuttal by Carole Baskin of the lies in Netflix Tiger King regarding the disappearance of Don Lewis and other misinformation about Big Cat Rescue. I am Chuckles152, and I'm going to read this for you, and then I'm going to bring 12, 13 points that I have made about things Carole says in this and in the docuseries that proves her to be pretty much a liar. And, right in here, in her own words, she contradicts herself, and it just proves that she is not to be trusted. And I want you to have an open mind going into this if you are a Carole supporter. If you're not, hey, I hope this helps deeply entrench you on Team Anti-Carole or Team Joe Exotic, if that's the team you're on. So, we're going to dig right in. When the directors of the Netflix documentary Tiger King came to us 5 years ago, they said they wanted to make the Big Cat version of Blackfish. As she states, Blackfish is the documentary that exposed SeaWorld for all the abuse that they were taking part in, that would expose the misery caused by the rampant breeding of big cat cubs for cub petting exploitation and the awful life the cats lead in roadside zoos and backyards if they survive. There are not words for how disappointing it is to see that the docuseries not only does not do any of that, but has had the sole goal of being as salacious and sensational as possible to draw viewers. As part of that, it is a segment devoted to suggesting with lies and innuendos from people who are not credible that I had a role in the disappearance of my husband Don 21 years ago. The series presents this without any regard for the truth or, in most cases, even giving me an opportunity before publication to rebut the absurd claims. They did not care about truth. The unsavory lies were better for getting viewers. There is no short, simple way to refute so many lies. If you do want to know the truth, it requires understanding the history of events in the years before my husband's disappearance and the roles and behaviors of the people interviewed in the series, which I have tried to do as concisely as I can below, but still requires a few pages. The time leading up to Don's disappearance. This is subsection. In the few years preceding his disappearance, Don's behavior was gradually showing signs of mental deterioration. Originally, Don, from time to time, would buy vehicles or other equipment at auctions with a view to reselling them, although mostly he never got around to reselling them. But gradually his hoarding of junk that he brought to the 40 acres the sanctuary now sits on increased and involved junk of no value. He deteriorated into dumpster diving and even got stuck in a dumpster and called me crying because he did not know where he was. Back then, Alzheimer's was not a commonly used word. I had not heard of it. Someone mentioned Alzheimer's to me, and I got Don to agree to set up an appointment with a specialist, Dr. Gold. Anne McQueen intervened and convinced him to see her psychiatrist, Dr. Blazzini. He referred us to Dr. West in the same building who was not there, so Don saw Dr. Russell. He diagnosed Don with bipolar disorder and gave him a prescription to have an MRI at St. Joseph's Hospital. I did not find the prescription until I was searching his bedside table looking for clues to his disappearance. His behavior became increasingly strange. He started refusing to use the bathroom and defecating outside. He brought in a homeless man to stay in our house. Carole, I'm going to interject. He's not homeless if he was living in your home. Sorry. I rescheduled an appointment for him to see the specialist, Dr. Gold, but he disappeared before the appointment date. Don's wealth, subsection. Everyone repeats the lie that Don was a millionaire when I met him. He had a business cutting the axles off of trailers pulled by tractors and selling the boxes as storage and axles back Great Dane. I don't know what that means, people. I'm sorry. If you search the property records, you will find he only owned 2 real estate properties at the time. He may well have been worth 6 figures, and coming from a very modest background, would have felt he was rich. No one, including Anne McQueen, who had access to his books, has ever provided any bank records or other evidence that he had more than that. Anne wouldn't be able to provide them because you've kept them from her, Carole, but we'll continue. One day at the bank, he overheard a bank officer say that he had a $20,000 loan in default he would be glad to sell for $2,000. He got the information, and because he could not read beyond a first-grade level, asked me to look into it. In brief, we bought the loan, foreclosed, and sold the property for a substantial profit. That is what got us into the real estate business. We started buying defaulted loans from banks and going to tax deed sales. This was before this became a popular business. There were few people doing it. With me doing the research, negotiations, and title clearing on the properties, we built this to a portfolio of properties to rent or resell that was worth around $5 million at the time of his disappearance. We kept the properties in trusts. During the roughly 10 years we were partners before we married, there were properties we bought together and some Don bought on his own or with another woman, Pam. When we married, I put all of those I had not worked on into one trust. The ones from our joint efforts were kept in a separate trust. The trust holding the properties I was not involved in was set up with his children as beneficiaries if he passed. I was the beneficiary of the trust holding the properties I was involved in. The main people interviewed and their lies. Anne McQueen is referred to as Don's trusted assistant. A few months before his disappearance, we caught her embezzling roughly $600,000 in properties by buying them with our funds and putting them in her name. A court ordered her to return them. Not the best sign of integrity, credibility, someone to believe. Now, I looked at this case. You can't make heads or tails of it. It was all done after Don had passed away, disappeared. I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. Wendell Williams. We made a loan to Wendell when he purchased the 40 acres that became the sanctuary. He dug out dirt to sell for construction, digging on an 18-acre, 30-foot deep hole without our knowing. He then began operating the hole as an illegal dump site for construction debris. The hole filled up with water when he hit a spring. He stopped making payments. We foreclosed on him and ended up with the property. Wendell is a very good con man, and Don continued to deal with him despite this. During the time when Don was declining mentally, I repeatedly observed Wendell cheating Don. Don liked to carry a lot of cash. I heard Wendell telling Don, "Remember that $2,000 you owe me?" and saw Don peel off $2,000 and gave it to him. A few hours later, I saw Wendell do it again, and because of Don's dementia, Don peeled off $2,000 again and gave it to Wendell. I confronted Wendell about it. After that, Wendell did everything he could to create a rift between me and Don. There were many, much larger transactions where Wendell was scamming Don. He was convincing Don he was selling Don real estate properties by handing him paper he said were deeds, but were not. Don, who could not read, believed him and would give him cash and checks for amounts in excess of $60,000, thinking he was purchasing property. Don's wife Gladys Lewis Cross and daughters Donna Pettis, Linda Sanchez, and Gail Rathbone. I feel for Gladys because every woman in Don's orbit adored him. He could make you feel like you were the only woman in the world, the only one who understood him, the only one he ever really loved. In the series, Gladys makes it sound like she told Don their marriage was over when she found out about me. Don had been unfaithful to her for years, and it was well known by her and generally. In the 1998 Dateline People magazine article, Anne McQueen said she was probably the only woman he didn't try to have sex with. Even Don's daughter refers in the series to Don's condition as being a sexaholic. When Gladys demanded a divorce in 1989, there was a man at her church she wanted to marry. So she told Don that if he would give her a quick divorce, she would settle for $1 million. She and the daughters worked with Don to pick the properties she could get, along with some cash, cars, jewelry, and coins. I was told that Don's oldest daughter, Donna Pettis, subsequently managed to lose all of it in the stock market in the years that followed. In 1996, despite their prior divorce settlement agreement, Gladys, who freely accuses me of being greedy, filed a suit claiming she was entitled to more. Daughters Donna and Linda testified on behalf of Gladys. Don expected Gail and Ann McQueen to testify on his behalf. Instead, they testified for Gladys. At that time, Don told me to eliminate them as beneficiaries of the PSRL trust. I did not do so because I felt they were family, and over time he would change his mind. To the best of my knowledge, he never spoke to any of them again. After Don disappeared, there were years of my having to manage the properties under a conservatorship demanded by Gladys and the daughters. The numerous attorneys they involved, all being paid out of the estate, reduced the assets significantly. Ultimately, the assets in the PRSL trust that had the daughters as beneficiaries went to them. Those assets were worth about $1 million. The assets in the other trust, worth about $2 million by then, came to me. The claim the girls made in the series that I picked the assets they got and that they were bad assets is nonsense. They got the assets from the trust they were beneficiaries of, worth $1 million. Gladys and her daughters had strong selfish motivation to lie and make implications about the meat grinder and Don being buried on the property 23 years ago that have absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever, and they continued to do so in the series. The supposed circumstantial evidence. The series makes a huge deal out of Don having applied for a restraining order that was denied, and that the term disappearance used in the power of attorney document. Both have logical explanations the directors did not explain. Anne's story about being told by Don to deliver the restraining order application to police if something happened to him does not make logical sense based on her behavior after he disappeared. The application for a restraining order. Don spent 1 week per month in Costa Rica. Don was a man who wanted to have sex daily. He would go to Costa Rica during the week I was having my menstrual cycle. Jesus, woman. Just Jesus H. Christmas. I accepted this as something I had to live with. During the week he was away, I would haul off the property as much of the junk as I could. Wendell told Don I was doing this. Don tried calling the police to get them to stop me. They told him he would need a restraining order. It is unclear if it was Don's idea that to get a restraining order he should say I threatened him, or if someone like Wendell suggested that. Don filed for the order June 20th, 1997, and it was denied. Don disappeared 2 months later on August 18th, 1997. Anne claims Don told her to give the document to the police if anything happened to him. If someone tells you that and the person disappears 2 months later, do you forget that as Anne claims? No, you remember and give it to police immediately. But Anne did not tell the police or me about it until September 9th, 1997, when she claims to have suddenly remembered just in time to spring it on me in a court hearing with Judge Sexton as a way to try and have herself appointed as conservator of our estate. Anne is an embezzler and a liar, and her claim that Don told her if anything happens to me to give it to the police and she simply forgot that until the hearing 3 weeks later is simply not credible. Later, when Anne was forced to return the embezzled properties at the end of the negotiations, with the matter now closed, she opened up and told me that she knew all along that the only reason Don applied for the restraining order was to stop me from removing the junk. Disappearance in the power of attorney. Don had told me about people going to Costa Rica and disappearing. Our Costa Rican attorney, Roger Peterson, said the Helicopter brothers were the local version of the mafia and Don was loaning them money. That is why I included disappearance as an event that would activate the power of attorney. I am sure attorney Joe Fritz is correct that this is unusual. It made perfect sense in this situation given that I was told by Don and by Peterson about Costa Rica and Don's dealings there at this time. Flying to Costa Rica. The entire discussion of whether Don's small planes could fly to Costa Rica was totally irrelevant. The planes could not fly that far, and no one ever suggested they could. Don had purchased a number of properties in Costa Rica, and after his disappearance, one of the caretakers called and told me there were people reporting seeing him there. That is the only reason I urged the police to investigate there. But the series seems to imply I was suggesting he flew one of his planes there. The van and airport. The claim was made by Kenny Farr that the police did not examine the van. It was the police who found the van at the airport, not me. And the mechanic, Dale Lively, said they came to him because they found his fingerprints in the van. So I have no idea where Kenny got this idea. The meat grinder. This is the most ludicrous of all lies. As Gladys and the daughters had did everything they could to make life difficult for me after Don disappeared, they spread this rumor that they thought I had ground Don up and fed him to the cats. And the media loved it. The meat grinder shown in the video was enormous. Our meat grinder was one of those little tabletop hand crank things like you'd have in your kitchen at home, like the one pictured here. Meat had to first be cut into 1-inch cubes like you see here to go through it. The idea that a human body and skeleton could be put through it is idiotic, but the Netflix directors did not care. They just showed a bigger grinder. The office trailer. The series makes it sound like there was something nefarious about my moving the office trailer to the sanctuary property to secure it. They implied this was wrong because it was Anne's office. The trailer was moved because Anne was spotted taking boxes of records out of the trailer, which she was not entitled to do. Anne was an employee. It was not her trailer. It belonged to our business. I removed it to where I could keep it secure so she could not keep stealing documents. The implication that this was done to keep the trailer from the police is nonsense. I showed the police the power of attorney entitling me to move it and invited them to look through it as much and whenever they wanted. The bottom line, Don was not easy to live with, and like most couples, we had our moments. But I had never threatened him, and I certainly nothing to do with his disappearance. When he disappeared, I did everything I could to assist the police. I encouraged them to check out the rumors from Costa Rica, and separately I hired a private investigator. Robert Moore's Wondery podcast, Joe Exotic, concluded discussion of Don's disappearance, but was much more honest and fair in their treatment of it. They ended the discussion by pointing out that the investigator told them that in their dealings with me, she was courteous and there was nothing that jumped out at me in terms of her demeanor that to make me think that she was not giving us accurate information or hiding anything. The end. Now, I'm going to go point to point. Number one, the safety of the animals due to the animal sanctuary being built on an old junkyard by her own admission is terribly in question. Like, this guy built an 18 by 30 acre hole in the ground, I think she said. And then Don was dumping car parts and other things into the property. That is usually how oil and other fluids leak into there. And would not be safe to build an animal, like no animal sanctuary or even a home would be safe to build there afterwards. I mean, she puts it right. Right here. Don was dumping stuff. Sorry. He started. There it is. Brought to the 40 acres. But gradually his hoarding of junk that he brought to the 40 acres the sanctuary now sits on increased and involved junk of no value. And then you go and you find what she says about Wendell Williams. He dug an 18-acre by 30-foot deep hole without their knowing and was dumping and filling that hole with construction debris. Not okay. Next, number two. So She claims that she didn't understand what Alzheimer's was in the 1990s, and then continues to push the narrative that Don had Alzheimer's, yet a psychiatrist who would know what Alzheimer's is didn't diagnose Don with Alzheimer's. He diagnosed him as being bipolar. And how can you keep pushing the Alzheimer's? That was in her words. Right up here, we just were looking at it. His behavior became increasingly strange. He was using the bathroom and defecating outside. He brought a homeless man in the house. But Dr. Russell, he diagnosed Don with a bipolar disorder. So, a little bit disgusting on her part to keep pushing the Alzheimer's thing and claiming she didn't know what it was in the 1990s, when this wasn't the 1970s. This wasn't the 1960s. People knew what Alzheimer's were. Number 3, lying about how much Don was worth prior to their marriage. So she claims that he was only worth $600,000. But their marriage wasn't until the 1990s. They didn't get together until 1985. So even if she was like talking about after she left her husband and got together with Don in 1985, so you're telling me that he made a lot of money between 85 and 89 when he gave his wife $1 million. Look, right there. In your words, you say she settled for $1 million in 1989. He didn't make that kind of money that he would end up needing to give over to his wife in that short of time. I'm sorry, you're wrong. Number 4, Don worth $5 million at disappearance, you claimed, but then claiming there was only $3 million in portfolios when it was to be split between the daughters and the wife. So, in your own words, when Don disappeared, where is that? So, Don's wealth. So before he disappeared, you right here, there were a few people doing it. With me doing the research, negotiations, and title clearing on the properties, we built this to a portfolio of properties to rent or resell that was worth around $5 million at the time of his disappearance. But when you get back to what you split between the wife and kids and yourself, let's see here. So you get to that. Right here, ultimately the assets in the PRSL trust that had the daughters as beneficiaries went to them. Those assets were worth about $1 million. The assets in the other trust worth about $2 million by then came to me. So where'd the $5 million go? Where'd the other $2 million disappear? You can't tell me $2 million went to lawyer fees, because it absolutely didn't. I mean, I could see maybe $500,000, $600,000, not $2 million. So once again, Carole, you're proven to be a liar. Number 5, how could Don not read if he was writing checks? I'm sorry to say the man in hindsight could not read past a first grade level, yet he was meanwhile writing checks. He wrote, I saw what he wrote on the, and I think everybody else that watched the documentary saw what he wrote on the restraining order against Carole. I have a hard time believing that he made all that money and he could not read past a first grade level. And then he's writing $60,000 checks. Get out of here. This is the one that bothered me the most when I was reading this. It's scummy to say his wife was the only person he wasn't trying to have sex with. Carole, I mean, it's one thing to rebut everything, but to bring up allegedly what Anne McQueen said in the 1998 Dateline People magazine article, Anne McQueen said she was probably the only woman he didn't try to have sex with. Come on, man. You didn't need to say that about his wife. That's just a dirty shot. Disgusting. As disgusting as you talking about how he would go to Costa Rica during your menstrual week. Come on, you're just a dirty person. Again, how could Don write the restraining order without being able to read? Now, she goes very far to assassinate the character of Anne McQueen to protect herself. She claims that Anne was a thief, that Anne stole property that was belonging to them. We don't know that it was very possible that she wasn't embezzling, that Don was giving her these properties prior to his disappearance. That court case happened after he disappeared. I can tell you that. I did read that. I don't fully understand everything in the court manifesto. It is very complicated. It does seem more to have to do with his conservatorship and everything afterwards, but and it's very possible Don was buying her these houses, and she's claiming that she was using their money. How was she writing the checks? That's what I want to know. To pay for it, don't make sense. And if she was, say that she had the power to write checks for Don, and she was writing checks and using it. Number 8. Suddenly there is a Costa Rican mafia. We didn't hear about this inside the docuseries, but we're hearing about a Costa Rican mafia, the Helicopter Brothers, that possibly Don was lending money to just very fishy all of a sudden. Number 10, why wouldn't his lifelong attorney handle the new will? She never addresses this here. She never addressed it in the docuseries. She claims that she uses the disappearance clause because of the Costa Rican mafia. And she says she goes in there and she says that she did it. She wrote the will. Why would she write the will for Don? When that is why I included disappearance as an event that would activate the power of attorney. Why are you writing this man's will all of a sudden when he had a will with his prior attorney, Joe Fritz? It does not make sense to me. Very fishy. In the docuseries, she very clearly states that it was a possibility he crashed into the ocean. Now she backtracks that. She doesn't even she doesn't even admit that. She says that there was no way he did, blah, blah, blah. But you said it there, which also proves that how full of crap she is. Number 11 proves how full of crap she is. She knew the documentarians were going to address Don and is now trying to spin it that she didn't, since she came off looking so bad. That is why Carole is writing this. This is why she's attacking all these people, is because she came off bad in this docuseries, and she now thinks she's going to spin all this stuff and she's going to write this article, which she posted to her website, and it's going to make her look good. It doesn't. And finally, number 12. I could go on all day about where's the grief for a lost loved one. She doesn't put any of that into her final paragraph. There is none. No, I miss Don. No, Don, wherever you are out there, I love you. I feel that that's because she knows where Don is. In the one place she doesn't address in this apology and backtracking and everything, he's under the septic tank. She never mentions it in this article. She never mentions it in the docuseries. And there's a reason why. Because she didn't want to, I get the meat grinder was pretty, but she never talks about the septic tank in here. She never talks about that. She never says she misses her husband, a man that helped make her wealthy, a man that she stole from another woman. And it's very scummy. It's very dirty. And this whole article, this whole lies in Netflix Tiger King regarding disappearance of Don Lewis and other misinformation about Big Cat Rescue is a very, very telling piece. I hope you enjoyed my my YouTube video about the Tiger King and Carole Baskin here. If you enjoyed, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you want, follow me on Twitter as well, at Chuckles152. Have a good one.